Aloha. Welcome to the Maui Community Investigation. As we then do more exploration into the fire, and particularly in this video, we're talking about the trees that were incinerated in very strange ways. And with me is one of my teammates, Bruce Douglas, and we have a special guest here. Tim Stokesberry, welcome. Nice having you here. Tim has a significant background in dealing with fire, has over 30 years experience. And thank you for coming back. Since that time, we've gathered quite a bit of data and information that I think is important to share. So again, your comments on that would be very, very helpful for us. So welcome, Tim. And Tim, could you just start off by giving just a little bit more information about your background over the 30 years that you've been involved with dealing with fires?
Okay, started off my very first fire experiences. I lived on Catalina Island, and we had basically a militia. I mean, we didn't have a lot to work with, so we started, but it was our fire team, and we did a lot of work with cats and cutting fire break and shovels, and so it was more wildland style. Although you always have urban interface, so I dealt with that early on. Not a lot of training, not real formal. Then I got at PRMRF. I started as a firefighter out at the base, and so I was a crash fire, and so I got to learn about all that type stuff, hypergolic fuels and whatnot, more shipboard firefighting and planes and whatnot. And then I jumped over to the county and got in a structural crew, and I spent a lot of time on rescue. But because I was on rescue, back then we didn't have a hazmat rescue squad. Rescue kind of did everything. You kind of picked up all the loose ends. So I got a lot of specialized training, nerve agents and, energized material labs and all kinds of stuff. So bombs and stuff. And so I got to get a little more training than the average firefighter walking around, but I don't live in a big city. So, you don't see a lot of those type things out in Kauai. We're a little more sleepy out here, but the training was very pertinent and it applied throughout my career. I'm not God's gift to firefighting, and I don't have a PhD in as an arborist or any kind of thing like that, or a forester, so those guys would be the more experts in that subject matter. But I've seen a lot of fire, and because we don't have a strong state presence on Kauai, we end up doing a lot of the forestry and urban interface work. So it starts off as a brush fire, just like this fire supposedly did, and then it moves towards a town or structures, and then you have to go into that structural mode. You're kind of combining two different modalities at the same time, right? Wildland firefighting is completely different than structural firefighting, but they cross over many times, unfortunately. And this was a giant crossover. So that's kind of where my little bit of expertise would come in, so to speak. And I got to say this, since I have the chance to speak, I trained for years with the Maui Fire Department. I consider those guys my buddies. They're a really good fire department. I mean, they're cutting edge in the state of Hawaii. I think they're probably number one. They're really far ahead. They are very advanced. They're just very organized, very well trained. They're really good. There's not like we look up to them like, wow, we want to be like them. So Maui Fire Department they're really good. And I got to say that to support the boys out there, because they're awesome.
So Tim, we'd like you to make comments as we move along and look at first of all, the number of trees that remain standing, especially when you look at so much of the destruction that occurred where things just turned into white ash. And as I go, I'll show you, look at the trees here that still have leaves on them. This was taken shortly after the fire. And you can see it's near sunset, so you can see the shadow here of these trees, and you can see that they have a lot of foliage in them.
And that one's very unusual, right? The one you're just circling right there, that would be a one you'd want to look into, because you can see it kind of eclipses over the footprint of the structure. So it was a close proximity. Can't tell if that's a burnt tree, if that's real green still. If that's green, that would be really bizarre. You can see the other tree just off to the right. You can see where the radiant heat or convective heat had touched those branches and started burning it. And you can see as the water was depleted from the tree, it started turning brown ahead of where it was actually burning, and then it left a little green spot that it never quite got to, right? So what causes that is that building that's no longer there, that's turned to white ash, is giving off the fuel to do that, right? So when you go back to your other picture where you have an overview, right? The last picture. Yeah, there. See those tall trees, the Norfolks or whatever those are in the background? And then you've got those palm trees and stuff. Now, if there was burning on the other side of that line, and presumably the way I'm looking at this, it looked like the wind was coming towards our face, like on this fire, it looked like it was coming maybe a little bit right to left and kind of downslope towards the ocean. I'm assuming the ocean's off to our kind of behind our back or in a little bit maybe off to our right.
That's correct.
So whatever fuel load that was on the other side of those trees that didn't burn, you could see that last example, you could see that house had enough BTUs to damage that tree. But these trees don't really have any damage to them, really. I mean, you look at them from the picture, anyways, what I'm seeing. So if the fuel load on the other side was just a little bit of short grass, that would be explainable. But if there was any structures over there or any trees or anything that would give off the BTUs or the energy, the heat to hurt those trees and didn't, now that would be something like an anomaly. That would be like, well, why didn't that happen, right? So when a fire burns, it gives off the radiant heat. Generally, the radiant heat goes out, convection, conduction, radiation. And whatever's causing that's burning, is giving off that BTUs, that's going to determine how much effect it's going to have on the green growth around it. Does that kind of make sense?
Sure does.
So if you had like a small little shrub that was knee high, it's not going to give off enough radiant heat to cook a tree like that. But a house fire would, right? A full-blown house fire like that turned to white ash, that's going to give off the type of energy. And generally, if you have wind going, that energy is going to more convect and go up. But the radiation is going to come in more to where you're going to see these funny shadows or footprints is when the wind's driving it, it's going to offset that radiant heat. So it's going to be less radiant heat going up against the wind and way more radiant heat going downwind, like a current in a river. Does that kind of make sense?
It sure does.
Anytime you have something that's giving off a lot of heat, and you see that example where it burned that house down and the tree was starting to burn, that makes sense. But then you see other instances that don't really make sense, where was significant burning and the trees weren't affected and they were downwind of the source of heat.
So you can see, again, as we just go through some more of these slides, that, again, this is not quite the same angle as this before picture was taken. But again, you can see the number of trees of everything. All of this was destroyed.
Yes.
And then the same thing. Here's a tree that seems to have a lot more foliage. And again, it was right over different buildings that were totally incinerated. And you can see, again, this is near sunset. So you can see the shadows here in this long shadow here from this one tree that's upright right next to this burnt building.
Right. And you can see on this one, there's actually burned pretty much almost complete circle around those trees. Like there's burnout all the way around those trees, right? Now, the only question comes in what was there if you get the before and after picture that would cause or not cause that radiant heat to do more damage to those trees. So it is unusual because it looks like it's burned completely around it and it really didn't affect those trees that much, which is, and especially the one where the shadow is actually over the footprint of the burning mass, right? So those structure footprints, I mean, I've been to apartment fires where one set of apartments on one side was on fire and everything, all the landscaping, palm trees and trees inside the apartment area, which was like a pool area and a common ground for a barbecue and all that, quite a big area, bigger than that footprint. And all the trees were completely cooked and brown and way less fuel load, way less burning going on, only one side of the courtyard. So that would raise some questions to me right there.
So, and as we continue, again, you can see this whole grove of trees here, and all of these buildings here, apartment buildings, were totally destroyed, and everything around it also.
Right. So
this whole area.
If you factor in the wind direction right there, if the wind was running from left to right or back to front, those trees should have, by all respects, should have been cooked. Because you're telling me that the same heat that cooked that building cooked the building down in the bottom right corner, but missed the trees in between.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
So these are the irregularities. Now, maybe some trees withstand the heat better than other trees, and that's where you're going to look at a forester or an arborist that can tell you, oh yeah, but those houses, most of the time when you see a burnt house, you rarely see it dissolve down to white ash like that. There's usually some structure still sticking up around it. That thing was vaporized. I mean, it's cooked down to the finest ash, it looks like. And I'm looking at pictures too, but That's what appears to me. I mean, there's really nothing left,
Yep. And as you can see, again, through different angles and different areas where we have these photographs, you can even see that the palm trees even, are still alive and doing fine. And certainly some of these trees here will have to be removed. There is arborists who've been going into the burn zone. We've asked for their reports and have not received it. So there's really no documentation that says that this is a level of suspicion with all of these trees that remain unburnt in this area. So again, it just raises suspicion as to what truly did happen when you see all these trees like this and everything just disintegrated to white ash, as you mentioned, around it. So again, except for this one house here, this is that red house that there's been a lot of photographs about that still remain unburnt.
Yeah. The photos so far away, I can't see the building construction type, what type 1, 2, 3, whatever that is. I can't see it. I don't know if it's a metal roof or if that's stucco or cementatious or whatever it is, but that's a lot of burn. And from what I remember, the wind was kind of blowing more offshore, kind of heading that direction.
That's right.
So all that heat should have focused right on that house. And it looks like there's even a couple palm trees right to the right of it that look like they're not completely destroyed, but maybe I'm not seeing it right, But yeah, that's pretty interesting. But Mother Nature's fickle, and weird things do happen once in a while. You see these anomalies, but when you see multiple ones, all over the place, that's what just raises the eyebrows, the suspicion.
To the incineration of the trees at the base and roots. So here's a tree that was right by the highway, and it had leaves still on it. This was taken 2 weeks after the fire. The leaves were kind of dried up, but they were still on those thin branches up on top. But then when you go to the base, totally burnt out deep into the root system. These branches here were put there sometime after, because they were doing cleanup at the time when we took the photograph. So that's one. Again, we see many of these. Bruce and I took 27 samples of trees that were actually gouged out way down into the root system. And you can see the outer bark was all fine. Now, there were some trees that we saw that you could tell there was a puka that got in here, something, a spark, an ember that then, but when we looked at those trees, the root system wasn't burned deep like the other trees that we'll show you as we continue along the line here. Now, for example, we're going to spend a little time in one parking lot where we had 7 trees that were all gouged out like this at the base. And as you can see, the upper limbs and the fine branches were fine.
That's a great picture there because it shows how the inside has been just burned out. So just with my being a critical thinker and just my experience, that would not be, in my opinion, caused by radiant heat. That looks like more of a lightning strike or something that burned it out from the inside. The time that we see fires like that are generally down at our beach parks where people are, the homeless guys, they'll start a fire at the bottom of a tree and they won't put it out and it'll burn up the inside of the tree to a certain point, and they're hard to put out. You're fighting gravity and whatnot, and they'll burn the inside of a tree out like that. But other than that, someone built a campfire around the base of the tree. But if it was from, say, like a house next door that was on fire and it was hitting it, the outside of the tree would generally be charred or burned or discolored, and that doesn't look like that. It looks like it was burned from the inside out. It looks really irregular to me. It looks more like a lightning strike, a tree that had been hit by lightning. Just my opinion.
Well, this is lightning striking. There's 2 videos here about, a newscaster saying how unusual that is. The tree is just like we're seeing, all fine, leaves are on it, but it strikes at the bottom, and that's what lightning strikes at. So in our never-ending quest to decide all possibilities of what happened, when what it could have been, you want to look at plasma wave technologies that behave a lot like lightning. And plasma wave technologies, that what we call directed energy weapons, is a subcategory of plasma wave technologies. It's plasma energy. It's a change of state technology. And when the plasma goes down a tree, when lightning strikes, the energy goes down a tree. It's an energy wave. It's a plasma wave in a way. And when it strikes the ground and grounds out, it lights the tree from the inside out, which is how we see lightning strikes. And there's many, many videos when lightning strikes a tree and burns the inside. And here we see, we showed that one parking lot where there were like, a dozen trees all burned in one parking lot from the inside out. And it makes you wonder, like, what, could have caused that. This one parking lot area, kind of in the ground zero area near Front Street, where they all look like lightning strikes, like plasma energy hit it and not a fire from the outside. What do you see, Tim?
I see exactly what you described, and you've obviously done some reading on it, and so have I. I'm not a scientist, and I'm it's irregular. It's something that I would look into, and I would call it irregular. And then also, if you have amounts, a lot of people don't realize, and these concrete walls that you're walking by, they'll tell a story too. And concrete is osmotic. That means it holds water unless it's got a vapor barrier on it of some type that stops it. Water will pass through concrete. It's cementatious. And generally what happens, if you've got sustained heat of that type and you see some of these walls running right by houses, there's supposed to be steel inside those CMU blocks, right? So you put steel in them, then you put your concrete in and it becomes a wall. And that steel, when it gets hot, it expands, just like the water does. It's in there and it spalds, and you'll get a lot of spalding along these walls. It'll look like the little explosions coming from the inside out. Much as you'll see if they didn't treat the rebar right, over years of time, the rebar will rust, which is slow oxidation, does the same thing. It expands and it'll blow out these walls. And these walls look perfectly fine. I don't see cracks. I don't see spalding. I don't see charring. At the photos I'm seeing, I see some stuff missing over on this one wall in the back here, and that could have been something there. But a lot of these walls don't look like they're damaged in the way they should be if they had radiant heat on them or right next to them. They should be a lot more degraded. So that's another thing to look for. I think I mentioned it on our last interview. Plasma is a weird animal, right? It's a transitional state of matter. It's a very unstable type of situation. But you're solid, liquid, and gas, right? Vapor. That's your states, your general states of matter besides plasma. And only vapor burns. Wood doesn't actually burn, right? Paper doesn't actually burn. Gasoline doesn't actually burn. It's a liquid, right? It's the vapor space. So for any common person can take a wooden match and light it in a dark room and hold it up and look at it, and you'll see the flame is actually not touching the wood of the match. Same with a tree. So when that tree is heated up, it gives off vapor, and that vapor is what burns. The actual wood isn't burning in its solid state. So for that to burn down the inside like that, that's why I'm saying it's not radiant heat, because radiant heat, it would be giving off from the outside like a match and then burn inward. This is being burned from the inside out, which is kind of the opposite of how things generally burn. Right? See the comparison or how that's working?
Yeah.
So, and with something like a lightning strike, that material is heated up so instantaneously and so violently and so quick that it allows it to do something like this. But it's not like radiant heat that's 100 yards away, then it's 50 yards away, then it's 30 yards away, then it's on top of the tree, and it finally catches a tree and starts burning. And you would normally see the source of the radiant heat would be the side of the tree most affected. This is burned from the inside out. So the most affected part is coming from the inside of the tree, not the outside, which is highly irregular. Right, but what I'm saying is you take the diameter of the tree, right? So that that wood, I mean, generally fire likes to burn uphill more than it likes to burn downhill, right? Because of convection, the heat in front of it and everything. So a fire will burn upslope way faster than it'll generally burn downslope. Here's a tree standing straight up. Say the tree's 20 inches in diameter, and you started a fire at the base of that tree through a little puka that was started by a brush fire. It's generally might burn at a higher rate going up, like because the fire wants to burn up, because that's where the heat's going is up. And so that you're going to get maybe a longer burn going vertical than you would the spread going out. But if you take a 20-inch tree and it's 40 feet or 30 feet tall, it would have reached the outside of that tree before it ever made it to the very tip, because it's still going to burn out, right? Does that kind of make sense? Like if you went to a grass field and you lit a fire on a calm day with no wind, it would burn a perfect circle. Basically, if the fuel load was correct, it would burn a nice circle and it would just keep burning outwardly. So that tree, if it started in the middle or a little puka in the side and started burning, you're telling me it burned the inside of that tree all the way up to 30 feet or 20 feet or whatever it was before it burned 10 inches from center? Does that kind of see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
Like that tree should have burned out and fell over before it ever made it 20 feet up in the air. I mean, if it was started at the base of the tree by a brush fire that got in a little puka, critical thinking, looking at it, it doesn't make sense. It's not something, it looks like a lightning strike. That's what it looks like to me. Have I seen a lot of lightning strike trees? Well, I grew up in the Sierras and I've seen a lot up there. In Hawaii, it's a little bit rarer to see lightning strikes in Hawaii, although I've been to calls where we've had lightning strikes and it's lit trees up. Usually we get it and contain it to that single tree, and it doesn't hopefully affect any structures, but it does happen in Hawaii, but not that many in a row. I mean, in my whole career of 30 years, I've seen maybe 2 times in Hawaii that I've been to a fire at a lightning strike. So you just had 7 of them in one parking lot. That's how many years, it doesn't add up. It's something I would look at and go, that's just not right.
Yeah. 7 in one parking lot. And we found 28 as we hiked around, looked at all the trees and seen if any of them were burned from the inside.
Right. So I would just raise my eyebrows and go, something's not right here. And I would try to figure out what the possibilities are, like you are, and just use critical thinking skills and go, that just doesn't add up. It's not correct. And here's the other thing. Look at that tree. And look how thin the wall of that tree is. It's down to like an inch thick or something, right? It looks small. Like I don't have a tape measure there, but I'm looking at it. It looks about an inch thick. So a tree that big in 80-mile-an-hour winds they're claiming, with only 1 inch of wood holding it up, don't you think it would have just blown right over, right? And then it wouldn't burn up those limbs anymore because it would have been blown over. That was what I was getting at. If it burned out from a radius from the inside and you got a 20-inch tree that's 10 inches of thickness, it burns out, it's going to tip over before it has time to go all the way up 20 feet or whatever and burn through those branches, right? It would have tipped over. Now up isn't up anymore. Up is sideways. So it doesn't add up to me, just using common sense. It just doesn't look right. That looks like it was instantaneously ignited from lightning or something, and it burned the core down. I would imagine the lightning would take the path with the most water in it because it's more conductive. It's like a wet piece of wood would be more conductive than a dry piece of wood. And that's why it probably burned down the inside trying to find ground. And that's what it looks like to me, just common sense,
Well, again, what we're doing right now is there are 3 reports, Tim, that have been released by the government, and none of them mention the trees as an anomaly or anything to look at. They're just saying that, again, it was a single source fire that was spread by high winds. And that's it. It's an urban interface fire and nothing to look here. But what you're saying is that when you look at the trees and just look at it very objectively and clearly, that we do need to have an investigation into the trees because it may give some indication as to the actual cause. Would you say that's correct?
I would think so. And temperature is the key here. Did that tree exceed a normal tree that was lit on fire externally and burned like a natural, like a brush fire versus what happened there? And it doesn't look like a normal brush fire to me. It looks like it was struck by lightning. And once again, you're getting a high amount of energy that's instantaneous is going to vaporize that material because it's so hot, right? Plasma is a very powerful thing, right? If it was plasma, and it looks like a lightning strike to me, the best way I could say it. Now, if it was God's lightning or man's lightning, I don't know, but it doesn't look like a normal brush fire, tree fire.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you for this analysis, Tim. And again, as we keep on digging, we're looking at over 20 of these omissions and discrepancies, rebuttals that we have from these 3 government reports that were published as of May 2024. So we're going to continue doing that. If there's other reports also, we'll look if there are discrepancies from the actual data from what they are claiming. So again, thank you for helping to clarify this thing about the trees. We're going to keep on doing our analysis and digging, but thank you, Tim, for saying that, yeah, there is something to look here into this.
For sure.
Okay.
And thank you guys for doing what you're doing. You know, if you two guys you're making a difference. You know, you're doing something and it's real. And, you know, it's always the battle, time and money and all that kind of stuff and energy and all that things, but you guys are sticking with it. And my heart says the truth always comes out.
I agree.